All right, so it's a little after 9, and I think we can get started with the presentation today. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for today's special event about teacher retirement policies in Ohio. My name is Aaron Churchill, and I'm the Ohio Research Director for the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, a nonprofit organization that works on K-12 education policy nationally and right here in Ohio. And I know you all are thinking what you all are thinking right off the bat. Why are we talking about teacher retirement and why right now? After all, there's a lot going on in the world. I mean, heck, if you're a golf fan, it's the opening day of the Masters. Wouldn't we all rather be watching Tiger Woods tee off? But let me make the case real quick up front that the next hour will be well worth your time. I mean, it's true that teacher retirement policies do often fly under the radar. Part of that's probably due to their complexity. Pensions, for instance, involves actuarial and accounting concepts that are probably foreign to most of us. Yet these policies directly affect the financial futures of Ohio's 100,000 plus teachers currently in the classroom, not to mention thousands more retirees. And they affect the budgets of the state's 600 school districts and 300 public charter schools. And ultimately, if you believe that attracting and retaining great teachers is crucial to improving student achievement across the state, design of retirement policy ultimately affects Ohio's 1.6 million public school students. Today we'll hear from Chad Aldeman, Senior Associate Partner for Bellwether Education Partners and a national expert on teacher retirement policies. We at Fordham asked him to write a relatively short policy brief that explains the 3 retirement options available to Ohio teachers and then analyze the expected benefits under each plan. Does the traditional pension plan yield the best benefits, as conventional wisdom might tell us? Or do the other options actually produce more retirement savings? With all that in mind, it's my honor to turn over the presentation to Chad. He'll give us a roughly 20-minute overview of his new report, which is currently available on the Fordham Institute website, www.fordhaminstitute.org/Ohio. And following his presentation, we'll have a time for Q&A. If you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and I'll collect the questions and ask them following Chad's presentation. With that, it's on to you, Chad.
Great. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for having me today. As Aaron said, I am a Senior Associate Partner at Bellwether Education Partners. We run a website called teacherpensions.org where we try to inform the public about how pension plans work. I'm going to be talking today, as Aaron said, about what's called the choice infrastructure that Ohio has set up. About 20 years ago, Ohio set up a system to allow its teachers a choice over their retirement plan. And new teachers today are given a choice over which plan they would like to have. And so they were given a form in their first day, early in their first few weeks. And this is what it looks like. This is the form. They can choose among 3 plans, all run by STRS, the state retirement system of Ohio. The plans here, you can see at the bottom, there's one called the defined benefit plan, which is a traditional pension. There's one called a defined contribution plan, which works more like a private sector 401k. Or there's a combined plan that has an element of both a pension and a defined contribution. So the plans, just to give a little bit of background for those who aren't as familiar with the terms that I might use. The first one, the defined benefit plan, is a traditional DB pension plan. It's a formula based on the employee's salary and years of experience that are multiplied together to give the employee's pension that they'll receive in retirement until death. The state sets a normal and early retirement age for when someone can begin collecting benefits. The normal is when they can begin collecting full benefits. Early is if they want to retire slightly early and take a reduced benefit. A defined contribution plan is essentially what it says. It defines the employee's benefit in terms of how much the employer contributes into the employee's account. So the employee owns their own account. They can make some investment decisions, and however the investments do is what the employee receives in their accounts overall. The employees can choose when to retire, although there's some federal rules around when they can begin collecting it and how when they have to begin collecting it as well. And then Ohio has a combined plan as well that offers a smaller defined benefit component. It's slightly less than half of the main pension, as well as an employee funded defined contribution component. So the employer in the combined plan does not contribute towards the defined contribution component. They're responsible for the pension component. All right, so if employees don't fill out the form that I showed you, they're automatically defaulted into the defined benefit plan. This was something that was set up when Ohio first offered the choice back in 2003, and it's still in existence today. Most people who are new to the system don't make a choice. We don't know exactly why that is. Some people might choose to take the automatic default because they know it'll put them in the pension, and that's what they would have picked anyway. But we know from lots of literature from other states, including Florida, which has a retirement system choice, as well as in the private sector for 401ks, employees are very responsive to default options. And they take that as a recommendation, they take it as the easier option, and so they're more likely to follow that. In Ohio, there are about 10% of new workers who choose the pension plan. They make an affirmative check the box to pick the pension. About 8% pick the defined contribution component, or 4% pick the combined plan. And as I said, 3/4 do not pick any box, they don't fill out the form, and they are defaulted into the pension plan. I will say that this decision is also irrevocable. So once someone makes that decision, they aren't allowed to change from the defined benefits. Ohio has set it up so if you choose the defined contribution plan or the combined plan, you can switch into the pension, but the reverse is not true. You can't switch from the pension to the other plans. The other option, the other thing that's very important that many of you may already know this, but just to say it out loud, is that Ohio has chosen not to participate in Social Security. So this is a decision that goes back decades. In the early days of Social Security program, states were given a choice whether they wanted to join or not for their workers, and Ohio chose not to join. So Ohio educators are entirely dependent on STRS for their retirement, for their employer provided retirement. They have no other thing to fall back on, no other safety net. So this paper set out to evaluate whether the current default, the DB plan, is the best option for Ohio teachers. So the first thing to note about that is that the DB plan itself has been changing. Ohio is phasing in benefit cuts for new retirees from 2015 through 2026. And depending on when people retire in that window, they get different benefits for the rest of their lives. As employees, the employee contribution rates are increasing. In the last decade, they've increased from 10 to 14%. So that cuts into the employees' take-home pay that they have to take home with them to pay for things like mortgage or childcare or anything else. STRS has also changed the benefit multiplier, and there was a higher multiplier for someone with 30+ years of experience, and now that has been taken away. The averaging has also changed. It used to be from the final 3 years of salary to now the final 5 years of salary, and that has slightly reduced the average salary figure that teachers receive. It also raised the retirement threshold, so when someone can actually begin collecting benefits. So it means that people have to stay even longer in the system to collect their benefits. And then the COLA is a big one. So this is the cost of living adjustments. Used to be 2%, is now set at 0%. So essentially, it's frozen in time and the benefits do not increase with inflation. Again, which is a big problem for someone who doesn't have Social Security, which are adjusted for inflation. The other thing I wanted to show you is a chart from the STRS financial report. This is their annual financial report that they put out. And it's a very stark claim that I'm about to make, which is why I put this chart in there. So technically speaking, Ohio's school districts are not contributing to employee benefits in the pension plan. And the way that you can see this is what's called the employer normal cost. That is the plan's assessment of how much the benefits are worth on average across all the members in the plan. And that employer normal cost used to be positive slightly of 4 to 5%. And starting in 2014, it actually went negative. And so in 2019, the employer normal cost is negative 3.17%. Now, that doesn't mean that they're taking money away. What it means is that employees, the members, are taking up that cost. And the entire employer contribution of 14% is going towards unfunded liability costs. Those are essentially debts. Those are promises that Ohio has made that they didn't fund in the past. But now that means that employers are not contributing towards new benefits for new workers, for current workers. And that means employees are picking up the difference. So even employees are not getting their full contributions back. That's unique from other states. Ohio is the only state other than some Illinois plans where that is true. And that is a startling reality, I think, for Ohio. So once you think about that, you need to start to see how much workers are actually getting in terms of retirement benefit contributions. And the easiest way to compare that is to compare the normal cost in the pension plan to the cost that's going into the investment plans in the defined contribution and the combined plan. So the way I've shown this here is the employee contributions. In all three plans, the employees are making the same contribution rate, 14%. The only difference is that in the DB plan, it's not all going into benefits. Some of that is going into the unfunded liabilities, as I mentioned. And then in the DB plan, there's no contribution toward benefits at the moment. And so that is the total sum of benefits is 10.83%. For the combined plan, the entire employee contribution, the 14%, is going towards benefits, plus the pension component is worth about 1.99% of salary. That means the remainder of that 14% employer contribution is all going to unfunded liabilities in the combined plan as well. The defined contribution plan, the employee benefits are going straight into the employee's account. They have access to it immediately, and it's portable. They can take it with them. And the employers, again, are contributing the same amount in all three plans, the 14%. In the defined contribution plan, there is an aspect of it that does go towards the unfunded liabilities for the DB plan. That's taking about 5.5% of money off the top, but that still leaves 9.5% that's going straight into the employee's account once they are vested. And so that final column on the right totals those sum, and you can see the defined contribution plan has considerably more than the DB plan. Even the combined plan has considerably more money going towards employee benefits than the DB plan does. All right, so another thing that is obvious once you start diving into how plans work is that the overall contributions are not necessarily equivalent to the employee's benefits. So in the pension plan in particular, the benefits are determined by a formula, not based on how much money is going towards them. The descriptions, the contributions I showed you before are averages. So any individual will get different benefits based on when they retire and the formula rules that apply to them. And then in the defined contribution space, it matters how much their earnings grow, how much their investments grow over time. So I tried to model this out for what this would look like. And that's what this chart shows. So the solid blue line shows the defined benefit plan, the total value for someone who starts at age 25 and works in Ohio for the rest of their career in Sturgis, Ohio. As you can see, there's not much for workers for long stretches of time until they start towards the back end, and then there's a steep ramp up as they reach the normal retirement age in Ohio. The combined plan, again, it has more contributions going into it, so that's why it is higher. It does have a little kink right around the normal retirement age, right around 60, but it still has less than the defined contribution component. And so when I made this graph, I was expecting there to be some sort of crossover, when in most states, the defined contribution or a cost neutral plan surpasses the defined benefit for the early career or mid-career workers, but not necessarily for full career workers. That's actually not true in Ohio because of the contribution disparities, that the defined contribution plan outperforms the defined benefit plan for all ages and for almost any scenario that I assumed. So the solid red line assumes a 1% less investment return than what STRS assumes in the DB plan. The dotted lines assume 2% less or more in different directions. Even if workers get nothing, no investment returns from their own investments, and they earn 0% return, they're still better off than the DB plan in most cases. So the takeaways that I have are that the defaults are very powerful. They are sending a lot of people into the defined benefit plan, but maybe that's not the right default for what teachers should look for going forward. I should say that this changing the default would not affect current retirees, would not affect current workers. It would be prospectively going forward from new workers and the sort of choice infrastructure that they're given. It wouldn't take away any decisions, so I'm not recommending that someone cannot choose the DB plan if they want to, but I'm saying that for the default, it's likely to give the most people the best retirement option. Either the combined plan or the defined contribution plan would be better defaults. I should also stick up for the DC plan. The STRS has set up a very good plan. It has good low-cost mutual funds, life cycle funds, so someone doesn't have to know how to invest. They can simply say their age, and the plan will tell them what sort of investments to make, and puts them in a broad basket of investments that they're not investing in individual stocks. They're investing in the entire stock market and bond market that's tailored, risk adjusted for their age. STRS also has set up a annuity. So for people in the DC plan who want to retire, the default is for them to get an annuity. So their total balance is converted into an annuity payment that looks very similar to what the DB plan already does. So that handles the sort of phase down process that people have in the defined contribution space. So my recommendation is either the DC plan or the defined contribution. The defined contribution plan or the combined plan would make a better default for Ohio. There's probably one other element that we haven't talked about, which is retiree healthcare. Right now, retirees, if they're eligible, receive retiree health benefits if they're members of either the DB plan or the combined plan. STRS could make that neutral. They could allow DC participants to also access that benefit, or maybe that suggests that the combined plan would be better if it comes with the retiree health benefits as well. So I will stop there and happy to answer any questions. There's also more detail in the paper itself as well.
All right. Well, thanks, Chad, for the great presentation, and really covered a lot of territory in a short amount of time. We asked you to do a lot. Now we'll turn to about a 20 to 25-minute Q&A with Chad. If you're in the audience and you have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. There are no dumb questions when it comes to pensions and retirement policies. Certainly, I asked Chad a lot of basic questions during the whole process of writing this report. So feel free to those in the chat box, and I can ask those to Chad. And if not, I will. If other people don't have questions, I will ask what I have. We got a question about the chat being disabled. Oh, okay. I guess the Q&A is working. So I see a couple in the box. But let me start with the question, sort of stepping back and taking sort of a big picture look at what's happening in teacher retirement policy across the nation, Chad. You work on this fairly extensively across the entire country. And you've done a lot of work in a number of states and nationally as well. So I wanted to ask, sort of kicking off the conversation, what does the picture look like nationally? I mean, how many teachers, or what percent of teachers in the U.S. are enrolled in pension plans? And are other states sort of struggling with some of these issues with their pension system as well? And are any states sort of trying to trying to fix their systems or try to move away from the pension system and moving to more individual retirement accounts. So just wanted to sort of give an opportunity for Chad to talk a little bit about the big picture and whether Ohio is unique in some of these challenges.
Yeah, so let me give some big picture national lens on it. So it's not that unusual for defined benefit pension plans in the public sector to have unfunded liabilities like I talked about for Ohio. Nationally, plans have promised $600 billion more than they have put aside for what they're going to pay for future benefits. So that is a risk that they will have to make up over time by raising contribution rates, cutting benefits. So Ohio is not unique in that sense in the pension space. Ohio is unique, somewhat unique in the giving teachers a choice. So there's been a steady evolution of the last 20 years of more states shifting to portable retirement plans, different types of structures like a defined contribution choice element or a hybrid component, or one state, Kansas, actually has a different option called a cash balance plan. So we know a little bit about how that evolution is going and what that looks like. And so Ohio is not unique in the fact that it's facing these challenges. It is unique in that it's a little bit ahead of other states in how they've set up and responded so far.
All right, great. Well, we do have some questions coming in, which is great. So I will start firing away at you, Chad. So one question that came in is, could you give any evidence that the pension plan helps with teacher retention? I guess relative to the other options that Ohio.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I would say, and I'm going to show my graph here, I think will help people understand a little bit more intuitively. So what the research suggests about pensions is that they are not necessarily a recruitment incentive, that people don't make their decisions based on the pension itself, partly because they're often thinking about an entire state. So we're talking about a state system here, and the STRS is a statewide plan. And so if you're looking at where to teach in Ohio, the retirement plan is the same all across the state. The second thing is that workers, young workers in particular, looking for their first jobs, are not particularly sensitive to retirement plan design features. They want a retirement plan, but they're not that paying attention to close parameters. And we see this in behavior. So if you look at the solid blue line down there, most people don't react to the pension for a long period of time. And so if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, what we've seen so far from states is that teachers don't react to the benefits. They're making decisions based on salary or geography or other life things that are more salient, more important to them. What you do see is that people are sensitive to their benefits as they near the back end. So if you think about those kinks right at, say, 55 or 60, people are very sensitive to those. And so a 58, 59-year-old is going to stick around to reach the normal retirement age at 60. So there's some retention effect at the back end, but it's small, it's very late in the career, and it's when a lot of people have already made their life decisions. And then it also has a push out effect. So if you're 61, 62, those are years that you could be retired and collecting a pension benefit. And so what we've seen is that there's a small retention boost right at those retirement ages, but then there's also a push out effect right afterwards as well.
It matters where you are in terms of your career, in terms of the incentives to stay in the classroom or
Yep. Can I say one more thing about that, which is that if you look at the turnover curve, there's very steep turnover. Someone in their early career, there's fairly flat turnover. Not many people leave in their mid careers. And then there's another spike right at the back end. If Ohio nudged more workers into either the combined plan or the defined contribution plan, you would see a flatter back end. People would be making decisions based on other factors, like they want to spend time with their grandchildren, or they're really not enjoying teaching that much, or they love teaching and they want to stay. So they would be more neutral rather than a push out and pull right at that kink, if you will.
It's a great question. Another question that came in that's a very good one is a question I also had on my list as well. Is there any effort to educate new teachers about their retirement options? Do we know of any ability for teachers to hear from the retirement system and sort of understand the consequences or implications of the choice they make or the lack thereof of making a choice?
Yeah, I mean, STRS does have an office that is dedicated to this, so any member can call them up and ask for some guidance. There's guidance documents on the STRS website. So I think that to STRS credit, they've done a good job of that. And as I mentioned before, they've done a really good job of setting up the defined contribution plan and the combined plan. So those are well-designed options. They're not just your typical 401k from the private sector. There's always more that could be done in terms of more education. I do think this nudging is a very powerful element of the automatic, so people who don't make any affirmative decision at all, and also as a sort of signal from the state about what might be better for the majority of people.
Yeah. Kind of a technical question that came in, and you mentioned it briefly, I think, in your presentation. It has to do with switching plans during a teacher's career. How does a teacher switch plans? And then the attendee suggested that she didn't think they could.
So my understanding is that if someone is in the defined contribution or combined plan, they can switch to the defined benefit pension plan within their first 5 years. They can make that decision to change. If they are in the pension plan, they cannot switch to one of the other plans. That's my understanding of how it works right now.
That was surprising to me, actually, finding out that once you're in the pension plan, you're pretty much permanently in there, and there's no sort of off ramp. If you're not, if the state makes changes to your pension benefits, you can't change. This is a question about your calculations that came in. Is your overall value calculation based on the amount of money a retiree could withdraw as a lump sum? Did you look at the average or median retiree, at what the average or median retiree would collect over an average or median retirement duration of retirement? So it's a question about withdrawing as a lump sum, and then how you did the calculations, and are we looking at averages or medians?
Yeah, so this graph is the net present value of the total lifetime value of any account. So the defined contribution plan, that is a lump sum, how much the assets are worth total. The combined plan is a combination of the defined contribution components plus the total lifetime value of the pension components. And for the defined benefit plan, it's the total value of their lifetime benefits that they can accrue over their lifetime. So it is in net present value. So this is essentially saying for a 60-year-old that's worked this long, they have a pension worth that amount. And if you think about how many years they're projected to live and how much they're going to collect annually, that's sort of how you can interpret that. Or if another way to look at it is how much their pension could be purchased. If you were going to purchase their pension in an annuities scenario in the private settings, that's how much you would have to spend to purchase a comparable annuity.
Okay. One of the questions has to do with paying down unfunded liabilities. And the question is basically asks, and sorry if I misstate it, and whoever asked the question can follow up. Um, Basically, it's saying, looking at the plan parameters, especially maybe what happened in 2012 with the reforms that Ohio did, that changed some of the benefits. Is Ohio making progress in paying down its unfunded liabilities? And there just seems to be a perception that the pension is pretty good. And do we see that sort of perception in other states? So I guess there's sort of two questions. One is the question around whether Ohio is actually sort of narrowing its gap between its assets and liabilities, and also a question about perception, how people feel about the pension, and sort of seeing it as a pretty good option.
Well, so there's a lot in that question. A couple of responses I would have. One, I pulled up this chart again to show folks what the unfunded liabilities are taking out of the system. And you can see it in this sort of middle column where it says unfunded actuarial accrued liability. That's a percentage of each employee's salary of how much the contributions need to be put in to cover the unfunded liabilities. And in 2010, it was 8.7%. In 2019, it was 17.17%. And again, the contribution rates have been 14% for both employee and employers. And so that is less than that unfunded actuarial liability, which means that the total employer contribution is going towards that payment, sort of like paying off your credit card as opposed to paying off the principal. And the remainder, the employee contribution is being cut into that because of that. And so that there's a lot going on in terms of contribution rates and benefit changes, but all of that is affecting what workers will receive going forward, both in terms of their take-home pay while they're working and the benefits they'll receive while they're retired as well.
Do you see the sort of nationally that teachers generally perceive the pension as being a pretty good retirement option, even if they don't face other alternatives, or in situations where they do face an alternative that they perceive that as the better option? Is that sort of what conventional wisdom still is?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's one thing that we've been working on in our work at teacherpensions.org is trying to raise awareness about how pensions work. So there's a sense that pensions are either too generous and they're so great for workers that they're really good as a recruitment tool, or some folks have been trying to take them down and say they're too expensive, we can't afford them. What I'm trying to say here is that that's actually like not true in terms of how they're working. In Ohio, the DB plan is not a great benefit, and the workers are not getting a good deal out of it. They're paying for more than their own benefit. And so there's this misperception about, I think it's being driven by full career workers. So someone who stays for 30 or 35 years does get a good benefit at the end of it, but whether they could have gotten a better benefit by making contributions on a different way, and the sort of distribution of benefits. If some full career workers are getting very good benefits, that means some short and medium term workers are not getting very good benefits at all.
You know what happened to know? I'm putting you on the spot here, Chad. What percentage of Ohio teachers sort of make it all the way to 35 years of service, and compared to
I
how many students?
I don't know it off the top of my head. I think it's in the paper. It is something that is known in terms of what we can project. So STRS has to make projections about how much they'll need to pay in future benefits. And so they look at past experience to know how many workers turn over every year. And I believe that I can't remember, I have to look at the paper, but it's only a small fraction of workers that stay for 30 or 35 years. Most people will stay and only do a short time. And so the question is, how do we set up a retirement system that is designed for the most people to get on the path towards a secure retirement?
We have a question about tax treatment of of benefits of pension versus 401k. The are the tax treatments generally the same? This isn't part of your paper, so at least as far as I remember, but were the tax treatments considered in your evaluations?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what the question is driving at. This is a public sector plan. So there might be some benefits in terms of the employer contribution in the defined contribution components. It's better to have your employer contribute than to have yourself contribute. There are limits on how much you can contribute, and the employer then is compensation that goes to you that is not taxable in the traditional sense of income. So there's some advantages that way. The graphs that I showed are just based, they don't consider the tax implications.
Good. I think that's all the questions that I have in the chat box. We're sort of running out of time. We have about maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and feel free if you're to send any more questions in, and I'll try to get them and squeeze them in before the end of our time. One question we had, I had to do with what happens if the state legislature actually does change the default, and new teachers, an increasing number of new teachers land in the hybrid plan or the 401k. And can we sort of have any sense of what that would do to the pension plan in terms of its unfunded liabilities and financial position? I wanted to put that question out there to Chad, if in terms of consequences if we actually move in this direction.
Yeah, so let me reframe the question. So the question is, if more people pick the DC plan or the combined plan, will that destabilize the DB plan for current workers or retirees? And the short answer is no, it should not. And there are a couple reasons for that. One is that both the combined plan and the defined contribution plan are making contributions towards those unfunded liabilities. And so they're helping pay for those unfunded liabilities over time. That's the big issue. And so it's not on this graph, but it's sort of, or on this table, but it's sort of implied in that middle column in the defined contribution plan. Remember, the employers are making a 14% contribution for all workers. It just depends on where that goes. In the defined contribution, there's about 4.5% that's going towards the defined benefit plan component. And the other thing to note is that, so that will help pay down those unfunded liabilities over time. The other thing to note is that the defined contribution plan will not add to the state's unfunded liabilities. The way that plan works, it's impossible to have unfunded liabilities. And so over time, if more people are picking the defined contribution plan or the combined plan, that will put less risk on the state and put some risk on the employees. And that will reduce the likelihood of further growth in the unfunded liabilities going forward as well.
Okay, great. Couple more questions, last minute questions came in. One is a question about whether Ohio, in order to get the full retirement benefits under the pension, you have to serve, I believe, for 35 years. And how does that retirement age or years of service compare to other states and possibly other professions? Do you have any idea about that, Chad?
Yeah, a couple things. So the public sector pension plans, I would say that Ohio was an outlier compared to other types of workers prior to 2015. Slowly over time, it's getting more in line with the retirement ages in the private sector. If you think about Social Security, you can begin collecting Social Security at age 62. So if Ohio's at 60, it's getting closer to that. It's been increased over time. there's research suggesting that teachers tend to retire earlier if they have access to a defined benefit pension plan and a retiree healthcare plan, which makes sense. If you have those benefits to fall back on, you don't have to worry about getting a second job when you're retired at 58 or 60, which is both good for those workers, but also maybe a challenge for the state financially to provide an earlier retirement for people. As people live longer, it means that the state is on the hook for paying benefits for a longer period of time.
And we have another question. If incoming teachers stand to benefit economically from choosing the combined or DC plan, the 401k type plan, do you have any idea as to why colleges of education or teachers unions haven't engaged new teachers to help them make a more informed retirement choice? Have you looked into that question about, again, sort of a question about information?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot going on there. There's probably some history and thoughts about what a teaching profession should look like. Remember, the STRS DB plan is quite old at this point, so people have more familiarity with it. It is guaranteed, I should say that. So guaranteed in the sense that once you're retired, you know exactly what your benefit is, and there's no variability. As I mentioned earlier, STRS is changing the retirement rules even for current active teachers, and so some of that is unpredictable in that sense, but it is guaranteed in the sense that the state takes care of all of the contributions and setting all the plan rules, and workers don't have to worry about investing or anything like that. Whereas the defined contribution plan in particular, I have these red lines here to show some uncertainty. We don't know what the market's going to do over time, and so I think there's some evidence suggesting that teachers are more risk averse than other professions. And so maybe that's part of it, of why they prefer the quote unquote less risky pension plan. I will say that this is another thing that we've shown in our work, is that the pension plan is risky for lots of workers in terms of their ability to stay in one plan for their entire career. So the investment risk is directly borne by the state, but there's lots of other risks that have come into it that I don't think have been fully captured over time.
All right. Well, that's I think our time. And I think we've caught up with all the questions in the that came in from the audience. So thank you everybody who submitted a question. They were great. Thank you, Chad, for the great report that you did for us. Again, you can find it on our website, institute.org/Ohio. We encourage you to read it. It's actually a very well done report, and it's actually fairly short. It's about 10 to 15 pages. So feel free to definitely encourage everybody to dive in. The video, we should have a video recording of this webinar available on our website as well soon. And we would encourage people to watch it and share it with other people. So again, thank you, Chad, for taking the time this morning to give the presentation, for your hard work on this report.
Thanks for having me.